Okay, it looks like we have a few more folks joining us, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us for Fire Central today. My name is Craig Meyer, and I'm the coordinator of TPOS, the Tallgrass, Prairie, and Oak Savanna Fire Science Exchange. I'll be the panel's moderator today. Fire is Central is produced through a collaboration between the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange and TPOS. Both organizations are part of the Joint Fire Science Program's Fire Science Exchange Network. And our mission is to support the use of science to make good decisions about fire management. There are 15 regional members of this network, with our two regions focused on grasslands at the center of the continent. And we're using Fire is Central to focus on and highlight grassland fire management issues. Our next two panels will focus on private landowner training and trainings for agency and workforce development, respectively. I'd also like to thank Lori Bamerlin joining us from the Great Plains. She's played a big part in pulling these panels together, and she'll be sharing resources in the chat today. Before I introduce today's panelists, I will go over some general guidelines to support today's webinar. You might notice participants' microphones and videos are off. This will help us avoid distractions and accidental interruptions with a group this size. We will be highlighting speakers for the presentation. However, you can change your own layout settings within Zoom using the View menu. As questions or resources come to mind, please share those in the chat box. And finally, a short evaluation survey will open in your browser when the Zoom meeting closes. And this questionnaire will give participants a chance to share feedback on the presentations. And we also want to hear your suggestions for future topics for the Fire Central series. With those items covered, let's meet our presenters. All right, today, as advertised, we have joining us Chuck Stanley. He's a rangeland management specialist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We have Dr. Chris Awanka, assistant professor at the West Florida Research and Education Center. And we have Wes Bukite from the Missouri Prescribed Fire. He's the Missouri Prescribed Fire coordinating biologist with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. All right, we'll get right into this discussion. Our first question will give us a chance to learn a little more about our panelists, and just like you to share with everyone how you got involved in wildland fire and what the path was to your current position. And Chuck, if you can lead us off.
Oh, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so that could turn into a really long story if I let it, but I got started in prescribed fire back in 1987, I guess, when I was attending Texas Tech. I had taken a class in range and wildlife management with the department there, and I enjoyed it so much I decided to switch my major over to that. Plus, I found out I wasn't very good in engineering. So anyway, my major professor was Dr. Henry Wright, which really wrote the book on prescribed burning. And we sat down in his office, and he was trying to get the classes for me, what I needed to take and what pathway and that sort of thing. And then he asked me if I'd ever burned anything. And my response was on purpose, because as a kid, I kind of lit some stuff on fire, but it wasn't really a prescribed burn. But anyway, yeah, so he said the next day, the class was starting and he pulled us out of class and I went on my first prescribed burn. I think it wasn't very big. I think it was about 600 acres. And I was out there with the guys. Keith Blair was fire boss, and Dr. Henry Wright, of course, and John Weir as well. And basically, I was hooked on prescribed burning. Granted, that first trip or two, I got to carry the backpack pump for the whole day, but I worked myself out of that into a drip torch eventually. So anyway, after I graduated, I still enjoyed doing prescribed burning, and ended up going back for a master's degree, doing research on prescribed burning. When I got on with the NRCS, I was in Oklahoma, and we started burning there, and just hit the ground running, really. And I had a great state conservationist who was all behind using prescribed fire as a conservation management tool. And we started the first prescribed burn association there in Oklahoma, Big Pasture Prescribed Burn Association. So when I did that, and when I got my position now at the Central National Technology Support Center in Fort Worth, after Pat Shaver retired, the duties of the National Fire Ecologist kind of just drifted over to me as a collateral duty of my work. So, which in that respect, it's pretty good deal, because I still get to provide a lot of training. I set those up, and also I am in the driver's seat for writing national policy. So that's where we are today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for joining us. And it's great to have your perspective from the beginning of the Prescribed Burn Associations up to everything you're doing now as well. So next, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Omonka.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here, Craig, and thanks for everyone to the participants that have shown up. So I got my start in prescribed fire way back after my undergrad degree, where, so I grew up in Massachusetts and did my undergrad there, and there was not a lot of prescribed burning at the time. I am proud to report there is more now, and it's great to see. But I went west after undergrad and had a job with the Audubon Society in western Arizona, southwestern Arizona, and started working with ranchers in the surrounding areas. And they were largely grazing public lands, and so there were some challenges. They all wanted to do prescribed burning to enhance their forage quality, and a lot of them were struggling with that. And so I got to talk to a lot of them about some of their challenges, and that got me very interested in what were the barriers to the effective management that they wanted to do, because they were conservationists at heart and wanted to do things that they couldn't. And so I ended up heading back east and went to law school to study environmental and land regulation laws to try and understand this barrier that folks were facing around some of the regulatory issues. And after law school, I went to Texas A&M for my master's and PhD and focused in prescribed fire ecology, and then tying that to this legal component, legal and regulatory, and looking at some of the hurdles that surround prescribed fire liability and regulations and all of that, and then tying that to the ecological side. And so ever since then, I've gotten actually to do some prescribed burns during my PhD and master's, and then continued in that vein with a postdoc at the University of Nebraska, looking at prescribed fire effects for controlling woody plants, and then moved up to the ARS in Sydney, Montana, and looked more at invasive species control there, but always continuing this kind of social ecological component, looking at laws and regulations and perceptions. And then finally here to the University of Florida, where I'm an assistant professor of forest management, focusing on fire ecology and the social and human dynamics of fire ecology.
Thank you, Krista. Really appreciate you bringing the socio-ecological perspective to the panel today, and also maybe helping bridge the Great Plains and Southeast perspectives for us too.
Absolutely.
So next up, same question for Wes. How did you get involved in wildland fire, and what was the path like to your current position?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So my journey into prescribed fire started about 10 or so years ago, and I was midway through undergrad pursuing a career in wildlife conservation. And at some point I said, I wonder what's all out there for me to pursue. So I called up the local wildlife biologist with the state agency, and he set up a time where we could get together, sit down at the office, and kind of talk about what some of those career paths look like. And And then he was willing and generous enough to provide some job shadowing. So I was able to get out in the field. And so my first day doing that was actually on a prescribed burn, and it wasn't as big of a unit as what Chuck was on for the first time. It was probably around 30 or so acres for the first unit. But, you know, I was able to hold a rake and check it out, and, you know, everybody's drawn the fire. And so I was really excited that, wow, I could pursue a career where I could do this for a living, for some money. So continued on with school and worked for Missouri Department of Conservation and helping out with prescribed burns on public land management and some private lands. And then pursued graduate degree at University of Missouri, and then started as a private lands conservationist or private lands biologist with the department. And so that really took me from working a lot of the public land management to working with private landowners and assisting them in helping them reach their habitat goals. And one of those components is prescribed fire. So identifying where prescribed fire is appropriate, identifying where it's not to meet their land management goals, writing burn plans, and then providing training for those folks. And so then I was offered a position with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. I'm going to abbreviate that to PFQF. So it's a nonprofit organization all about upland wildlife habitat. And so I worked as a farm bill biologist for 5 years, very similar to the previous role, working with private landowners and assisting them with their land management. And so doing a lot of the same things. And then I've been in my current role for 2 years as prescribed fire coordinating biologist, and I serve in a statewide capacity. And so do a lot of the same things, providing that technical assistance to private landowners, but also have the opportunity to collaborate and communicate with different conservation agencies and organizations, and try and bridge a lot of the communication gaps that might be out there, and just bring people together. And so also be able to assist them with recommendations on different policies and things like that to have more safe and effective prescribed fire on the landscape. So and then here the last 2 years been working a lot with prescribed burn associations and just helping people come together, start conversations, and bringing those like-minded individuals together to share resources and get more fire on the ground. So I know we'll talk more about PBAs later. So a lot of my perspective today comes from working with private landowners in the state of Missouri.
All right, thank you, Wes. Yeah, this is a panel that's kind of my dream panel for the Northeast Midwest prescribed fire science and management workshop, but not everyone was available. So appreciate that we're able to pull this together virtually as well, and have these perspectives from the federal NGO and research as well. So the first broader question to get into the discussion here is, well, we know that barriers to prescribed burning aren't static and have changed over the centuries and in recent decades, of course. And we wanted to hear a little bit about how your agency or organization's perspective on prescribed fire has changed over time. So Chuck, could you lead us off there?
Yes, yeah, I'll give it a good shot. So, wow, that's a good question too. And it kind of varies too. From a national level, prescribed fire has been encouraged to be used and utilized by all the states and be available for programs. How it changes over the years really is how the states perceive prescribed fire or fire in general. And that changes from year to year. Well, it depends on the state too, but it usually changes with the state conservationist changes. So when a new state con comes in, depending on what their views of prescribed fire are, is usually how the state tends to gravitate towards for that time being. In national policy, we have it set up, and we'll probably get into that a little bit more later, I think. But it's set up that it's available for all producers to utilize as a conservation practice alternative when feasible. So, but yeah, so really the changes really occur because of the changes in leadership at that state level, really. And as long as I'm at the national level, I'm going to continue to push prescribed burning, but the state cons have the ultimate authority for their state.
Thank you. That's really helpful insight to understand a little bit more about how NRCS works. So Wes, I know you've been with PFQF for a little bit shorter amount of time, but how have you seen things changing, especially with implementing the PBA programs?
So mentioned earlier, we're known as the Habitat Organization, and so it's all focused on upland habitat, whether that is pheasants, quail, and other non-game species, threatened and endangered. And so, prescribed fire is such a critical land management tool, and so our organization supports that tool and making it more available. So, we do have habitat specialist crews out on the landscape across several states, and so those are actually positions that are implementing land management practices, and each state has different supporters, different partners that those groups are working with, but they're working on public land and they're also working on private land, and conducting some woodland restoration, timber stand improvement, invasive species, but also getting prescribed fire on the ground. So it's really great to see that that work being done by folks within our organization. And so here within the last year, the organization has been working on updating our prescribed fire policy. And so what that is leading towards is our staff, which the bulk of our staff are biologists, whether it's farm bill biologists or coordinating biologists, but that's a lot of our boots on the ground. And so we've actually been working towards getting our policy and everything in place for the organization for those staff to be able to get out on the fire line on the clock. And so I think that's really important. I mentioned earlier, what we do is working with private landowners. We're helping them identify where it's appropriate to use that tool. We're writing burn plans. And so to me, I learn the best whenever I'm actually doing it. And it doesn't matter if I've been on one burn, 100 or 1,000, it seems like every burn, there's a learning opportunity. And so if we want to continue to develop safe and effective burn plans, it's important to get out there and be on the burn, serving different roles. So I'm really thankful and excited that our organization has made that happen, so that our staff can get out there and continue to learn and provide even better products. But also the other key component is that we can be those mentors to the private landowners that have maybe gone through a classroom training, maybe a couple prescribed burns, but still want to have that conversation on the fire line, just be a sounding board and talking about what you're seeing, maybe what they aren't seeing, and just again working towards a safe application of fire, and we're improving habitat.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, I think something that kind of jumped out at me there was mentioning the learning opportunities with each burn, and how those can be utilized to the benefit of our agencies or organizations, private landowners, through all of this. So thanks for bringing that up as well. And mentorship, of course, a huge part of fire as well, that maybe the public doesn't understand as much either, about how important the human component is. So thank you. Krista, you've moved across the region. Do you have some perspective on your during your time of changes that you've observed?
Yeah, I guess in research, obviously, there's a rich history of fire ecology research, and a lot of that's contained prescribed burning research. And having moved here to the epicenter of where it all started with Tall Timbers Research Station, along with Henry Wright in Texas, it's kind of opened my eyes to the changes and looking back a little bit. And I think some of the things that stand out are the kind of tie now is much stronger between fire ecologists and fire scientists and managers, because I think a lot of the challenges that we're facing require us to think about the conditions, the fire behavior, and all of that, and tying it to our ecological effects in order for us to understand how ecosystems respond to fire and prescribed fire. So seeing much more of that now, not just a did it burn and what happened, but how did it burn? What were the conditions? What were the behaviors? And scientists that study fire behavior coming together with the ecologists, I think has really pushed the field ahead, which is nice to see. And then for me, the biggest exciting change is just how much fire ecology is going on now. So the amount of studies that are done and manuscripts that come out and research that's funded to study fire ecology and fire science has really just taken off in the last couple of decades. And it really shows the importance of fire to our ecosystems. Almost all of our terrestrial ecosystems have fire as a driver in some way, and it has great impacts when we do suppression and we don't do prescribed fire, and it has impacts when we do fires in different ways than were historically applied. So I think it's really great to see that this is just taking off as a field, and more people are realizing the importance of fire for understanding ecosystems. And then my kind of area of where I focus has also really taken off with the social ecological components, trying to tie what you're seeing on the landscape, because we can know all of the fire ecology of the system, and it doesn't mean anything if we can't get people on board with burning. So understanding some of those barriers to getting fire on the ground and doing more prescribed burning, and where are those barriers coming and how do we break them down, that area of research has really taken off lately too, and tying the social and ecological together, and along with regulatory and legal and socioeconomic and all of that. So that's really great to me to see that ramping up in our understanding in fire ecology. But there's a long way to go, obviously.
Hey, Craig, while we're on this topic, I just wanted to share, like to Chuck, I'm thrilled that Missouri NRCS is in the process of updating their prescribed fire policy, and it's gearing up towards adding capacity for prescribed burn planning, and it's just really great to see that effort, and look forward to assisting where I can and helping out with some different trainings and hands-on experience.
Yeah, excellent. Actually, that's up at leadership now, trying to get finalized for approval, which was a good policy change for Missouri. Or Missouri, I don't know exactly which one. Depends on if you're north or south, right?
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with, I'm good.
Yeah, I'll just add, if any of the participants out there have been working with NRCS or affected by NRCS policy, that would be kind of interesting to just get a feel for that as well, and kind of the relevance or impact of that too for our audience. So Chris, I think you highlighted kind of 3 different parts of fire science that have changed or have been changing, and I think those are all really good to highlight, especially in the Midwest. We saw just a trickle of fire science papers in the 40s and 50s, and then it really has taken off in the last couple of decades, and we still have some work to do with getting fire behavior, fuels, and that sort of thing included, but it feels like we're moving in the right direction there. You also mentioned the socio-ecological research, of course, and so kind of shifting to zero in a little bit more about that with prescribed fire capacity. So we know that the state level prescribed fire liability varies greatly across the region, and that affects people in those states differently. So could you tell us a little more or summarize the take home from your research on that topic?
Absolutely. Yeah. Back in 2015, so dated now and time to redo, but I did a research study where we looked at some of the liability standards and how they impacted the amount of prescribed burning that was being conducted in areas by private landowners. And basically the only region that had really good data that we could look at for a long enough period of time to assess this was where I am now in the Southeast. Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina had all different liability standards. So Georgia and Florida had a limited liability for certified prescribed burn managers, and Georgia has limited liability for all burners, where they applied a negligence standard in cases of escapes that was lower than the traditional. And so normally what we apply is a simple negligence standard, which requires someone who's bringing a defendant, a burner, to court to get damages from an escaped prescribed burn to show that the burner did not act with reasonable care of someone in that situation. And then Georgia and Florida early on in the 90s, later 99, I think was when Florida switched their standards. They kind of shifted to this gross negligence standard, and that's in their statute now. And that says that a burner must actually have acted with wanton and reckless behavior. So no care, no diligence whatsoever, which is a much higher standard for a plaintiff to show that a burner has done than that simple negligence standard. And so that applied this lower liability and protected burners from liability, shifting some of the risk onto the public in general, because the states identified prescribed burning as a public good and something that offered public benefits. And so when that happened, we ended up having a checkerboard of states that some had simple negligence, some had gross negligence. And so I was able to look across the states, and just right at the county line there where the states connected, so that we were controlling for a lot of these other variables that might impact how much burning is done, like land use and weather and all of that. So we were looking at those counties that shared a border and seeing if there was simple negligence and gross negligence differences. And what we found actually was that there was around 2% more burning in the years of the study, which spanned from 2005, shortly after Georgia and Florida's gross negligence standard went into play, until 2015. And so what we saw was 2% more burning in those counties that had a gross negligence standard. And 2% doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when we looked at just our study counties in Alabama, which were about 20 counties or so, we saw that that would amount to 150,000 more acres burned per year if we had the gross negligence standard there. So there's actually a substantial larger amount of prescribed burning going on in states with these gross negligence standards in place than simple negligence standards. And it's interesting being here now in Florida and talking to folks, and you can really see the comfort level with their lower liability standard when they're burning. The certified prescribed burn managers, you can see that they are really comfortable, that they don't feel they will be in trouble if an escape happens, and they all cite that we're certified, so we have a lower liability. And it's interesting to see the data borne out in my interactions with folks.
Cool. Well, thank you for that summary, and we can work on getting a link as well to that study to share with everyone afterward as well. So I think one thing that jumped out to me there that you said was those state statutes are shifting some of the risk onto the public, recognizing that fire is a public benefit. So that, I don't know, I guess that just really jumped out at me. Do you see that in Florida versus other places that people are seeing as a public benefit versus just a benefit for the people who are doing the burning themselves?
Absolutely. I think why that standard came about in Florida was originally the prescribed fire legislation came about because there was a particularly bad smoke year here where there were lots of smoke accidents, and it was from wildfire. And what people were realizing was that prescribed fire was actually reducing the amount of wildfire. And so the large public benefit that I think is really at play here is reducing wildfire risk, especially in states with a lot of wildfire. And so here people really saw that. And then in 99, when they added the gross negligence liability standard to their statute that was already created to create a right for burners to do burning and promote it, then that was a year that had a lot of wildfires again. And so that they said, okay, we're not doing enough. We need to promote fire more and shift that risk a little more so that people are comfortable enough to do prescribed burning. And so we do see that wildfire hazard reduction as being an important public benefit that's recognized in a lot of the states that shift over to gross negligence.
Interesting. Yeah, and as Dr. Twidwell presented in back in the fall, we were seeing an increase in wildfire risk, especially on the Great Plains and in the Southeast and other parts of the East where maybe the public perception isn't there yet, but it's definitely noticeable and documented. So, cool. Well, thanks for explaining that connection. I guess segueing over into a little more specific question. Chuck, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, speaking about national policy on NRCS, but could you tell us a little more about how prescribed fire varies among NRCS state programs and the interaction between the national and state level?
Yeah, so programmatically, it's available through EQIP and even through CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. We have some abilities there to where we can actually help the landowners defer some of those costs for putting prescribed fire on the ground. Where it comes in good, and I want to echo Wes, what you guys are doing with Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever is absolutely helping these landowners out there, and it's helping us because of our policies, like we talked about on the different states having a different supplement than national policy. It's just invaluable assistance that we're getting from you guys, and our policy, we put up training. We've got a job approval authority list that our employees can go through to get prescribed burning training and be able to go out there and assist the producers. National policy allows for that, to be able to assist producers with the burn planning and actual application of the burn. Now the states changed that up a little bit as they see fit, like I mentioned earlier about the state conservationists on what they want to allow to be in their policies and what they want their employees to do. But nationwide, there's like 8 states that don't recommend using prescribed fire at all. And there's several reasons for that. John Weir did a big study for us back in 2020, I believe. And the reasonings were varied across there. Some of them, they'll allow the NRCS participants or utilizing prescribed fire, but only on CRP lands. 18 states, the employees are only allowed to recommend prescribed fire as an alternative conservation practice, but they're not allowed to be anywhere around the fire or do the prescribed burn planning. And as Wes mentioned earlier, I don't see how you can plan a burn if you're not going to be out there with that producer and executing that plan. I wouldn't want to go into an office in the NRCS, here's a burn plan, or anybody for that matter, just go do it this way, because we all know conditions change and you've got to make split-second decisions on what you need to do out there in the field. But they don't let them do planning or participate on burns. There's some lawsuits that went on. It scared some states, and they didn't. They just said they're not going to do it, period. And then there are states where employees are not allowed to write the burn plan, but they can only on state or federal lands be able to help. And then in 13 states, there's dependent on the other agencies or TSPs, Pheasants Forever, to do these burn plans and execute the burns. So it varies among the states considerably. John did a really good job on putting that report together. But, you know, we continue to push prescribed burning as a good practice, a needed practice. I think with this report from the Wildfire Commission, there's going to be more of it. And also, we're getting a lot of interest from the Native American tribal councils to start using prescribed burning, cultural burning, if you will. And so I think our employees are going to need to be able to accept those burn plans from the individuals as they come in. Our national policy, I changed that up a little bit to where before it was you had to have a job approval authority of a certain level before you could approve a burn plan turned in by a TSP or others. And we changed it up a little bit because the backlog to the state specialist was getting so great that they couldn't keep up with the number of burn plans being turned in because the field office level employees didn't have that job approval authority. And what we changed was instead of approving the plan, national policy now says they can accept the plan if they have got that job approval authority level 1, which is awareness of prescribed burning. In other words, they had actually put it in the conservation plan as the practice for that producer. So that's helped a little bit, I think. And like I said, Wes and Pheasants Forever has been a great help. And some states are starting to let their employees go out with those burn crews and participate to a certain extent and get that training from them as well. So it's not just NRCS training that is the only training that's available for our employees. We opened it up to where they could gather other trainings as well. But programmatically, we're getting more and more interest in it. And I can tell that because of it's not the payment assistance we're getting from different states are starting to send in requests for higher payment levels for the landowners to get these done because they're having to hire a crew to come out and do them, and that costs money. So anyway, but I think we're on the right track with getting as much prescribed fire on the ground as we can. So I hope that covered pretty good, Craig.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's definitely along with the state to state liability differences. I think differences in how policies are enacted in different states, like through NRCS, or play a huge role. So hopefully that's helpful for our audience too to kind of understand how it's working from the agency side. And I know the last thing that you mentioned there, have been hearing that for a long time, that the cost share on prescribed burning maybe in the eastern states on smaller burn units was not competitive if it was based on other parts of the country. So that's good to hear that's changing as well, and will be making an impact. I'm going to try to pull in one question from the chat here that may be related to what you're discussing as well. And this kind of relates to pollinator habitat. We have a question from Wisconsin saying NRCS is giving landowners a lot of money to establish pollinator habitat. These native plantings will need fire to maintain them in the future. And is that a consideration at NRCS of considering how to provide support and capacity to maintain this pollinator habitat?
Yes, that's good. That's a good question. And nationally, yes. Again, it'll go back to the states, but we see the need in it, and a lot of the states that do have equip and available and for prescribed burning, there's quite a few of them now that are starting to put in one of the purposes and an actual cost share for wildlife habitat management using prescribed fire. So it is available, and I think it'll start increasing, just like with the amount of funds available for prescribed burning to do that. And one of the other things too, it's opened up with technical service providers. They can write the plan, a landowner can hire them and they will get paid for the burn plan. And then if hopefully they're the ones that are doing the application with that landowner, they will get paid for doing the actual application of that as well. So there is monies available for the landowners to hire those TSPs.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know we have at least one or two TSPs on for participants as well, so maybe we'll get some more questions about that. I don't know, we're doing pretty well on time, so I don't know, Wes, if you want to add anything about your organization's role as a TSP, or if that's a bigger question for later.
I think, touched on it earlier as far as being able to assist on the burn unit layout, fire break layout, and burn plan development, and then our habitat specialist crews being able to implement that fire. I can't think of anything else at this moment. I know on this topic, I was gonna, once we get to the PBA discussion, kind of talk about how the NRCS support kind of factors into the private land side and PBAs.
Great. Well, yeah, we can take the discussion that way. I know you have a really good handle on why private landowners are burning in Missouri as well. And that's one of the reasons we hope to hear from you too, is seeing the PBA model moving from the Great Plains into the prairie forest transition that we have a lot of in the T-post region as well. And so have you needed to adapt or change the PBA model much, or is it working well, the existing model in terms of the goals of landowners across Missouri?
So I'm not, the most familiar with the PBA models in more of the Great Plains states, but I believe the common objective is to pull these resources together to overcome the hurdles of, maybe a lack of knowledge, equipment, experience, training, and then just people available to get fire underground safely. So it's that same mission. Missouri, we have a prescribed fire culture, and we've had folks out there that have been implementing prescribed fire on private land, but we're continuing to see that culture build, and that's really great to see. So from my interactions, it seems like the bulk of the folks that I work with are recreational landowners. We definitely do have ag and cattle producers on the landscape and using prescribed fire. Seems like that's trending upwards as well. But my experience has been a lot of recreational landowners that have their property, for, just their family to enjoy. It might be the timber production that they have as well, but it's being able to enjoy it. And so those folks are reaching out, and they're very interested in prescribed fire. And so see that a lot with providing some trainings, is that we'll have that one day or whatever that session might be, and folks will always pull you to the side afterwards and say, hey, let me know whatever you're burning next time. And so the PBAs, the prescribed burn associations, are a great mechanism for those folks to be notified of every burn opportunity in their area, whether that's a single county or multiple counties, and they can decide if they have the time to get out there and continue to gain that experience and mentorship like we talked about earlier. So in Missouri, what we've been working towards on PBAs, I'll take a step back. So 2 years ago, we had 5 prescribed burn associations in the state, and today we're sitting at 13. And so we've really seen just a tremendous growth, and that's just been advertising these different PBA events, people hearing more about it. And so the folks are out there. It's about connecting them together. So just seeing that willingness to help each other out and share resources has been really tremendous. So going back to, you get the notification you know, you might have to work that day. Someone's planning to burn, you might have to work, or the kid's got a ball game, we got a church event, but that's okay. Chances are that the other, at least 6 people and the other 50 or 100 or 200 plus people that received that notification, they'll be able to pull together a crew. But whenever your schedule lines up and yeah, I can be there, you respond back and get all the details and get out there. So I haven't seen any burn that's been canceled because of lack of people there to help. They always have meet your burn plan requirement and then some. You got additional capacity. So, going back to earlier, it's about getting hands-on experience and building our knowledge, skills, and abilities to get fire on the ground effectively.
And I know recently, at least the Missouri Prescribed Fire Council had a map of the PBAs. And it's, I guess, kind of 2 questions. Is that getting updated? And then for those who haven't seen it, can you say a little bit more about the size of some of the different PBAs, like how many counties might be encompassed? And you alluded a little bit to how many people might be involved in any one PBA too, but if you could say a little more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. So I'm looking at the map here on my wall, and it's on the website as well, at moprescribedfire.org. You can check out all the PBA resources. Thank you, Lori. And it's, as of, if this was January, it's already outdated because we had the newest PBA officially formed, the Rivers North PBA, just west of, just east of Kansas City. And so, a lot of the bulk of our PBAs in Missouri identify a core county or a couple core counties and say, we're willing to work within this area and into the adjacent counties. And so that really sets up a geography that's really dictated by how far folks are willing to travel to assist on burns. And we found that it's generally an hour of windshield time in one direction. Definitely see folks that extend beyond that. We have absentee landowners that live an hour and a half or 4 hours. They live out of state, and they still engage with the PBA. They definitely don't make it to every burn, but those folks still provide or serve in one of the leadership roles. They might serve on the board, and they're contributing, according to their strong suits. And if it's, being a secretary or treasurer or, assisting in that manner, but it's really neat to see folks coming together and bringing what they have. We do have 2 PBAs that work within a radius. So they identify, here's the middle of the county, and we work within a 45-mile radius around there. And so I don't see them as an exclusive group. They're really inclusive to folks that, if you're in our area or even just outside and you want to help out on burns and we could potentially help you, let's get together. Let's share that experience and help each other out. Craig, I don't know if I answered all those questions that you have. Let me know if I didn't.
Yeah, I think that's a great start, and just all about trying to share some of those lessons learned and how things work in different kinds of regions. And what you're saying too echoes what I've heard in the times I've had a chance to chat with John Weir as well. Is like, at least in Oklahoma, a lot of the landowners involved in the PBAs, their motivation is wildlife, second to livestock. So appreciate you being able to share that story, because I think depending on who's delivering it, people sometimes are assuming it's really rancher focused. So it's cool to hear how it's working in Missouri.
Yeah, like I mentioned, it seems to me more interest from recreational landowners, but we do have cattle producers that are part of the PBA too. So it's inclusive, and if we're sharing the same goal of using fire safely and effectively and help each other meet our goals, it doesn't matter what your main goal is. It's just coming together.
I'd just like to add, from a research standpoint, consistently when we do surveys of users of prescribed fire, or even surveys of general landowners and whether or not they use prescribed fire, it's the PBAs come up as being invaluable, and across the board on whether it's knowledge, resources, equipment, and liability even, there's benefits to being in a PBA that comes out when we ask folks, and it seems to be a strong correlative of how comfortable people are with burning.
Thanks, Krista. And Chuck, do you have anything you want to add about PBAs with your history of involvement there?
I think that's the best thing going, is to get the PBAs, because there's such value and strength in numbers. And when you get a bunch of landowners that want to do prescribed burning, they can have a lot of pull when they counties, the state start setting up burn bans, uneducated burn bans in a lot of cases. They can change those county commissioners' minds with that group. So I think it's all important to have those producers on board, and they're the ones that can make the change.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I'm sure we could do a whole 90 minutes on PBAs, and it has been done before, but since we're trying to connect up the eastern and western parts of the grasslands, hopefully maybe that's an introduction for some folks. And I have seen the National Cohesive Strategy, their capacity grants. They've been funding some, outright PBAs or models that are very similar to PBAs in the eastern part of the T-Post region as well. So hopefully we'll be learning more from those, and that model seems to keep spreading. I know Lori shared the national map of PBAs, and that's one that is always being updated as well. Okay, well, we have a few more questions here from kind of the prompts for our discussion, and we'll probably have some time for Q&A at the end as well, if people do have more questions that they want to put in the chat. We may have touched on this as well before, but wanted to drill a little bit more down into the human side of capacity, and to talk about who can promote or inhibit workforce development in your agency or organization, which may be similar across organizations or maybe really different.
Looks like Chuck might have frozen up there.
I was.
Yeah.
It's back.
Is it working?
Yeah, now you are. Yeah, we saw you unmute and then you're frozen.
Wow. Did you want me to start on that? Or
yeah, if you're willing. Otherwise, I was going to pick on someone. So
sure. Well, certainly I'm a big promoter of it. And I don't know, like I kind of said a while ago, I think the landowners are the biggest promoters and can be. I said, they can sway county commissioners to do something, but I tell you, they can also sway state conservationists' ideas of getting fire on the ground and utilizing that and getting the employees the training they need. So, yeah. And really, I think it's it always goes back to the liability issue. When I go do trainings in different states, the biggest thing comes up is the liability for the agency personnel out there that's assisting with those burns. Or it's even getting now to, if we even do a contract for a prescribed burn, it's starting to get to where is the agency liable, because we're actually offering payment supplementation for that prescribed burn. So that's something probably would need to look into with our headquarters attorneys and things, but that's the biggest inhibitor, really, of getting fire on the ground.
Thanks. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to hear landowners, but that's really great to hear about that influence from the ground up versus thinking about it from coming down from national, like something like the wildfire policy update. So
And just kind of building off of that liability statement, I think that's one thing that people don't think about directly when they think about liability in a state, because that tends to be thought of as applying only to private land burners. But ultimately, so federal employees and state employees are protected by torts claims acts, and states each have their own, but that just means the employee themselves is protected. And there's been a creation of what will be the route for having a potential lawsuit with the agency, if the agency's taken to court. But so I think in most places, the agency would be subject to whatever the liability in that state is. And so if you have a state with gross negligence, that would be applied in a case with the Forest Service or with the NRCS. And so I think that liability can really play a role in comfort for state agency folks as well.
Chuck mentioned earlier that, a lot of this kind of hinges upon what leadership, what their interest or comfortability is. And so I think that probably rings true to some degree in most agencies, organizations. But I'll say, I think, who can promote or inhibit the capacity for this tool? I think it's up to all of us, because we're all lumped into, prescribed fire practitioners, or they're going out burning, or whoever that is. I think it's up to all of us to, do, proper planning and preparation and implementing that fire to reduce the chance of something going wrong, and just setting a good example for for others. Because how things, the news always focuses on negative things. So any mishap, it's going to be distributed, nationwide. So it's up to all of us to set a good example. And on the successes, we have a lot of successes. I mean, the data show that prescribed fire, can be a really safe land management tool. So it's up to us to also get the message out there and share the story of all of our successes and what we're accomplishing together using this tool. That's the first knee-jerk reaction is it's scary, and rightfully so, but we have the opportunity to use it safely.
And I think too, at the national level, if we think broadly, both the update of the National Cohesive Strategy and the wildfire report that came out to Congress, a lot of them have started emphasizing the importance of getting everyone involved on fuels management and making sure that everyone from state agencies, federal agencies, private landowners, nonprofits are all getting capacity to do that. And so I think now we're struggling to figure out how do we make sure that happens. But there's a lot of talk of MOUs and thinking about how we facilitate some of that private land burning and state agency burning within the federal framework. And so I think moving forward, we'll hopefully come up with some innovative ideas on how to make that work. But this idea of all hands, all lands is spoken of a lot in the National Cohesive Strategy. And that means making sure the capacity is there for everyone to do burning. And I think workforce has repeatedly come up as an issue. And so innovative steps toward creating a workforce for fires is going to be on the minds of people that are thinking about this at a national level too.
thanks, Krista, for highlighting that national element as well. And the next two webinar panels are going to be focusing on trainings for private landowners, and then trainings that are going on to reach out to college students and those who are in the agency pipeline and others as well. So we're going to keep drilling into that. And yeah, Wesley, just wanted to echo, that's something that we hear over and over again, whether any of us who are burning know the other people, or are familiar with their agency or how they work. We all are kind of viewed as one body if you're wearing Nomex or have a drip torch in your hand. So that's good to remember that we're all affecting each other as well. All right, so one other key aspect we talked about the people and mentorship, and how important the landowner needs for fire are in terms of how that's communicated. And just to drill a little bit further down, we did want to talk a little bit about how is funding for training or workforce development made available to employees in your agency or organization. Where are the funding sources that you're relying on? And maybe those have changed over time as well.
I'll kick it off on that one. The majority of our organization's staff are there because we have the support from our chapter members or chapter volunteers, our donors, and so we're able to, if they want to contribute to boots on the ground positions, we're able to use those funds and leverage them with partners and leverage them in grant applications. So, for instance, a lot of our positions in Missouri are in partnership with NRCS and with the Missouri Department of Conservation. There's a lot of unique positions out there that have other partners, but that's kind of the model for a lot of our positions across the organization across the country. So it's truly a partnership position. So, from there, it's working within those agreements and being able to move funds towards PPE and different training opportunities. So we do budget into our positions to allow for that professional development mentioned earlier. It's about continuing to progress through our training and experience to be able to provide that technical assistance to our partners and to the private landowners.
I guess I can go. The years that I've been with NRCS, for a long time, the training was up to the states. We do have national trainings. I'm going to one next week that we're holding in Stillwater. And now we had all the national trainings made available. And that was about the only time the employees got to go and actually be around doing actual on the ground learning and training. And but the states had to cover their travel costs for their employees. Well, it got to where that the states, as you know, we're always under a continuing resolution, it seems like year after year. Well, the national headquarters sees the value in trainings, not just prescribed burning, but all of the trainings. And so they started picking up the tab and paying for the employees' travel to do the national trainings. And this year we have 5 of them that are centrally funded. So the national headquarters is paying for those people's travel to go to these trainings, and they also pay for the contractors that we have hired to provide that training, which has been a big help. So it went from having 10 or 12 in a class to having 30 in a class, just because of that, the states not having to put up funds early on for their employees to get that training. We've also worked with the Great Plains Fire Science Program. We did a training a couple of years ago in North Dakota, went off really good, where they put up the funding mainly to get the contractor funds to be able to put on that training as well. So that's another avenue we've been taking. And something about the training, I always love it when we do national trainings, You get people from all over the country, and say we're in Oklahoma, Tallgrass, Prairie. And I said, well, that works here, but it won't work in my state. Well, it will. It's just a matter of the people's perception of prescribed burning. All anybody ever sees on TV is wildfires or a controlled burn that got away. And I hate that that's all that gets televised. Like Wes was saying, and Carissa as well. We've got to promote prescribed fire more as a big group. And I think that's something that we're doing with the trainings, or at least for our employees nationally, because there's always somebody they're scared to death of fire, but they wanted to take the class and they finally get to go do it. And they're pretty much standing back at the beginning of the class and we're out burning. And usually by the end of the class, they want the drip torch. They want to be out there lighting. They said, I had no idea this is the way this worked, because all they had in their mind was this big, huge fire that's just roaring across the countryside. And, it's really enlightening and gratifying for me to actually get that message out to those that really don't know anything about prescribed burning. So.
Chuck, maybe you know a little more about this, but I seem to recall in Nebraska when I was there working with the Les Canyon Prescribed Burn Association, they were able to receive a conservation innovation grant to fund some of their equipment and training that they were doing. Is that, and that's an NRCS program, but is that something that's typically used in that way?
I don't know about that one itself, but yeah, I think that was a great way to, and they actually got different grants as well to get that start on equipment and everything. And that was one of the best that I've actually gone out and burned with. That group of people really, really good. They've come a long way. But it's always that start, and you get those people. Now they got a huge group, and now it's turned into more like I think they wait for burn season to get around, because they all know we're gonna go out and we're gonna do a burn, and then we're gonna have a meal afterwards, and we get to sit and talk to our neighbors about other things. But usually it's about the burn itself, and so they're getting a lot done. But those funding grants are available, different avenues too. But yeah, there's money available, and we actually got prescribed burning put on that IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act funds that we picked up, and prescribed burning's on there. And so I think there's going to be even more money is available. How it gets distributed, I don't know. That's above my pay grade, but at least we got it there.
I think that is one reason a lot of the prescribed burn associations now are incorporating as 501c3s so they can apply for grant funding. And there's a lot of state funding. It varies from state to state, obviously, but I know here in the Southeast, there's a whole lot of Department of Environmental Quality and Forest Service grants that can help build capacity, buy equipment, that sort of thing.
Yeah, in Missouri, our PBAs have received really good support from Missouri Department of Conservation, U.S. Forest Service, National Wild Turkey Federation, PFQF, and then Missouri Prescribed Fire Council also has an equipment fund for those groups. And then also we have, the Prescribed Fire Council has training assistance, those funds that are available to offset the cost, because it's folks that are volunteering their time and they really want to get to that training that's 3 hours away, but maybe the fuel or lodging is just cost prohibitive. So we're trying to overcome some of those hurdles and help them out to be able to further their endeavors.
Yeah, there seems like an interesting connection there, whether it's federal employees traveling to the national training or the private landowners having to take the time to drive a few hours, that the travel support is a big part of it. In addition to putting on the training itself. Interesting to hear that those numbers are increasing by that much for the national trainings as well, when that funding has been made available. The other thing I kind of heard in there as well is that we hear about the importance of getting the drip torches in the hands of private landowners and events like learn and burn events, and just how we learn through hands-on training. So to hear that, how important that is for the federal employees as well, within an organization, it just really connects, no matter what uniform or whatever someone is coming from or where they're coming from. That is the key thing coming through. Excellent. Well, this has been a really informative discussion, and I think we do have a couple of questions from the chat, and ranging from specific to a little broader, and then a couple that were shared during registration as well. So we have about 10 minutes left to kind of do that Q&A. So I'll share those questions, and kind of whoever feels ready to jump on those, I'll turn it over to you. This first one is more specific, so turn that to Chuck. There's this person was wondering, are the payments you referred to available without the landowner applying for a DIA? And Chuck, you may know what the DIA is, but I'm not familiar with that term.
That's they've changed that up again. It's we got to come up with a new acronym every time we make a change to something. So DIA is design and implementation. Now I forget what the A is for. Anyway, there used to be a conservation activity plan. Well, now they have what's the actual plan, which is the design and implementation. So, but no, I think the producer, the funds still have to go through the producer that's applying for that EQIP contractual payment. So, and that may change later. I don't know. Everything's changing, and like I said, we got these IRA funds now too. So there could be a lot more changes to try to get those funds made available for producers, not just prescribed burning, of course, but for very numerous practices.
Yeah, maybe if the person who shared that question, if they could follow up and let us know how big of a bottleneck you see that as, that might be helpful as well. Another question from the chat. I think you'll be able to talk a little bit about this. It says, local fire protection districts have both a long history of fire prevention and fire suppression, as well as very strong and close ties to local communities. This person would be interested in knowing how the participants have interacted with local fire protection districts and district leaderships in viewing prescribed fire and prescribed burners as an asset versus a negative concern or a problem.
I need to make a better effort to engage with the fire departments and volunteer fire departments. Definitely would like to generate more relations there. But I'll share from our PBA kind of interest meetings. That first meeting where we invite folks all from the community to come out and just have a discussion. We've had fire department representatives there, and they kind of sit towards the back of the room and kind of get a feel for what's going on. And afterwards in discussion, the sentiment that I've heard is that, oh, this is great. I really like seeing people coming together and okay, they're working on using the appropriate tools, and sounds like a good proportion of them have the experience and being able to gear up towards just safer burns, where he said that it sounds like I won't have to get as many calls now with these folks coming together. So that's been a really positive interaction. Tuesday, I was with the Upper Merrimack PBA. We're burning some woodlands. a couple units, and one of the crew members was volunteer fire department gentleman. That was, we were on the line just chatting, and he was all about the PBA, and it was new to him, and he was excited that these groups are going, and he was very positive towards prescribed fire.
Yeah, I think it could probably be pretty hit or miss, but my experience, at least working in Montana, for sure, the county rural fire department is on the front line for suppression, very cued into the county community, and also we're really working on fuels management a lot. So when they had the chance, which is tough in Montana, short burn windows and big fire season, they would, Eastern Montana, they would be out doing proactive fuels management and definitely participating on those types of things together with BLM and bring community in as much as possible. So yeah, I think that's definitely an opportunity. I don't think that's ubiquitous across all of Eastern Montana, but specific to the county that I worked in, they definitely played a big role.
I'll just tap onto that. It's when I was in Oklahoma, we used to invite the local fire department to come out and be on the prescribed burn, and did that with other trainings we went to. And it's always entertaining, I guess, or exciting too, that the fire department people, they're still volunteer, but there's go out and say, this is so much less stressful than chasing fire. It's a lot easier just to be sitting here and watching how this is done. And the next thing you know, they end up putting drip torches on their trucks because they understand the value of fighting fire with fire. So, yeah, that's the funnest part, is enlightening people to the use of prescribed burning.
I'll just add from kind of the regional and state perspective. I have seen the regional strategy committee for the Northeast region of the cohesive strategy. They have a working group that is working with fire protection. So they're trying to help bridge that as well. And then from state to state, it varies quite a bit, but some of the prescribed fire councils do have participation from the volunteer fire departments and other fire protection as well. So it does sound also like it's a lot up to the individuals who are in the leadership, but that there have been some really opportunities to build some bridges and make the case for the value of prescribed fire there. Let's see this, and this might be somewhat related. There was a question from at registration time, perhaps another bottleneck, but could you talk a little bit about how you find qualified trainers to work with you and help run training events? Is that something that's local, regional, national that you're looking toward?
I think from my perspective, in the states that I've been in the middle of the country, it's very different depending on where you are. In Nebraska, almost all of the trainings were run by Pheasants Forever across the whole state, and the Nature Conservancy would do a treks. And they had enough capacity to put on a whole lot of trainings, and I think cover everything that was needed. But in some areas, there just doesn't seem to be that capacity. And so then you have to think about how to draw on other resources. And I think some of the state fire council leadership is really important. And then at the national level, that's something that training courses, there's groups that you can reach out to. So I know that the National Coalition is working with some folks on creating some new training courses. At Tall Timbers, they're creating some training courses for states for certification. So I think there's various routes, but leadership is important. If you don't have the capacity within an organization in the state, or there's not one established, then that's probably should be a top priority to figure out how to get that going, and reach out to the states around you to see how they got it going and kind of take guidance from others.
Thanks, Krista. And yeah, we'll be getting into that, I think, a lot more with the upcoming webinars as well. So let's see. I think, well, with Krista and Wes on the panel here, this question might be one you could address. How do you address the questions around liability and insurance with private landowners and volunteers? And I think this probably ties into the PBA model, but if there's any other comments you want to share, that'd be helpful.
Go ahead, Wes.
Liability is always a topic that comes up in discussion, and rightfully so. And so, here in Missouri in 2021, we had Prescribed Burning Act enacted, and it was, previously we didn't have anything that defined liability. And so now we have a simple negligence standard. So things are defined, they're more spelled out, and worked with the Department of Conservation, who administers that act, to provide a guidance document that really clarifies the legal language as myself, and I think some others need to simplify things. So we have that tool now to distill or provide facts and distill some misinformation that was out there just because we had nothing in place. But moving that towards the PBA, what we're doing, as Chris mentioned earlier, is providing due diligence. So we're making sure that we have the adequate people available, the adequate equipment. All of the PBAs in Missouri have in their guidelines that a prescribed burn plan is required for PBA to assist on the burn. So we're having that documentation in place that outlined all the preparation. So we're doing all these things. We're checking those check boxes that demonstrate, yes, we're providing proper care. And so it's always that perceived risk that lets folks boil in their heads of and overshadow the actual or the realized risk that we find. So I think PBAs are a great way to make sure we have everything there and get the job done.
Yeah, I definitely second that. The state fire councils and the PBAs are great resources for getting the information out there. And that document that they created in Missouri is, I don't know that there's something that explicit in any other state that's set out by the group that's certifying people. And that is really key. I think that's a great kind of innovative approach to take to get the word out to folks that this is what your real risk is, as Wes said, and not just this perceived risk. And so I think if we could have more documents like that and get it in the hands of people through the fire councils and the PBAs, that would really go a long way toward helping people understand what their liability is. And then it would be great to have some kind of clearinghouse for understanding insurance potentials. It's varied so much. I know burners who have called their general liability insurer, and they said, sure, we cover prescribed fire escapes. Not too many of them, but some. And then there's some national level insurance available, but it's always fluctuating. And so insurance is kind of a tough issue to keep track of. And so some kind of clearinghouse for understanding what insurance is available to people in different areas would be a really good step forward. And maybe having that type of Missouri document shared to accessible to other states to see if they want to do something like that. Because I really feel like that it puts ammunition in the hands of the landowners to feeling safe when they're doing things, so they know exactly what they need to be doing.
And I haven't seen the insurance being a hurdle for private landowners to implement the burn. The lack of insurance affordability really impacts the consultant, the contractor side of things. So that's a very high need that we need, is more affordable insurance policies and I guess insurance companies that understand the cost analyses with prescribed fire. That's where we need more effort.
Yeah, I think that one can be tough because they're saying the same thing about prescribed burners understanding the cost side of actually writing a piece of insurance. So I think that's a conversation that, and maybe with the safety records that are being developed now, that's one way we can move the needle on that a little bit, and talking with insurance companies and seeing how to bring that cost down. But there is just a general underwriting cost sometimes that I think is hard to get over, unfortunately.
The fair point. I don't understand how they build all that into their policies.
Yeah, it's not my area either, but I've been speaking with some insurance folks, and it does seem that there is a cost hurdle in just creating the insurance and getting it out there and having underwriters draft them.
Yeah, they've definitely been identified as an important stakeholder, and then yeah, there are still challenges with coming to common language and understanding what each other are trying to do. So, and thanks, Wes, for highlighting kind of the difference between the importance of insurance for the consultants and contractors versus the private landowner who's taking that just on their own property. One last question, and we have some resources we can share in the chat about this as well, but any of the panelists have anything to share here. There is also a question about how are tribes' historic knowledge being used in today's efforts in fire over the landscape? Or is that something you've been seeing in the partnerships you've been working with?
Yeah, I guess I can kick that one off a little bit. I definitely see it being more recognized as an important thing in a lot of different groups. And so even from a science funding standpoint now, there's funding going towards how do we build capacity to include cultural burning in with our national wildfire program. How do we incorporate that? And we've seen it in the cohesive strategy and coming down from national legislation as well. The Prescribed Fire Act that is being written, there's a strong push to make sure that cultural burning is being included. And again, just as with workforce capacity, it's a how do we implement that and make sure it really is encompassing what we want it to. But definitely more and more people are recognizing the importance of cultural burning as part of our prescribed burning program in the United States.
Yeah, that was good, Chris. I don't really have anything to add other than been tasked from NRCS to put together a tech note, mainly for our field offices, to understand that that cultural burning is allowable under our prescribed burning standard as it is now. But the word I get is that a lot of the folks don't know it. So I'm trying to get that out so that they will understand that's allowable. And I learned something the other day visiting with folks from California, that if you go in and say to do a cultural burn, that they don't have to go through the permitting process that a lot of just private landowner would. And it all boils back down to saying it was a cultural burn, which I found very interesting.
And just to follow up on that, I know California, I can't recall if they have or if they're in the process of making that explicit in their state statute. Their prescribed burning statute is to identify that tribal sovereignty is important and make sure that that's written into law, not just practice.
Yeah, good.
And that's definitely a topic we've been touching on in the research side as well. And I think one that we want to have identified as one for a future topic for fire is central, and kind of what some of the well, just addressing some of the things that have been going on in the central US and connecting it to other parts of the country as well. All right, well, for me, that time seemed to fly by. So thank you very much, Chuck, Carissa, and Wes. Thanks also to Carol Baldwin and Lori Bamerlin at the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange for your collaboration in making this webinar series possible. And I would like to give a big thank you to everyone who joined us today, especially as fire season is ramping up with our extra warm and dry weather here.